In neighborhoods like ours, assumptions don't start loudly. They start quietly. A glance through the blinds. A pause in conversation when someone walks by. A casual comment in the group chat that sounds harmless on the surface. Has anyone actually talked to her? She's always by herself. It's just strange. No one ever announces that they're building a story about someone. It just happens. One small observation turns into a guess. The guess turns into a conclusion. And before long, that conclusion becomes the version of truth everyone repeats. She moved in without much noise. No housewarming party. No long introductions on the sidewalk. The moving truck came and left within a few hours. By evening, the porch light was on and the blinds were drawn halfway. That was enough for people to start filling in the blanks. She must be single. Probably divorced. Maybe something happened. The thing about a close-knit community is that silence makes people uncomfortable. We are used to knowing each other's routines. Who leaves at 8 a.m.? Who argues loudly on Thursdays? Who orders takeout too often? We treat familiarity like safety. So when someone doesn't offer that familiarity, it feels like a gap that needs to be filled. And gaps make people creative. She walked her dog at the same time every morning. Headphones in, eyes forward. A small nod if someone made direct eye contact. No lingering. No small talk. To some, that was confidence. To others, it was coldness. She thinks she's better than us. She doesn't want to be part of the community. But no one asked her. That's the strange part about assumptions. They feel easier than conversation. Instead of knocking on the door, we narrate from a distance. Instead of asking, "How are you settling in?" we ask each other, "What do you think her deal is?" Every small detail became evidence in a case that no one admitted they were building. She didn't decorate much for holidays. She rarely had guests over. Packages arrived, but no one saw who sent them. Her car was clean. Her yard was simple, predictable, quiet. And quiet, in a place full of noise, starts to feel suspicious. In tight communities, belonging often comes with performance. You attend the block party. You join the HOA meetings. You wave a little longer than necessary. You volunteer for the bake sale, even if you hate baking. Participation becomes proof of normalcy. She didn't perform. That absence of performance turned into a story. Maybe she was hiding something. Maybe she didn't like anyone. Maybe she thought she was above the rules. The less she engaged, the more people projected. It's interesting how quickly we attach personality traits to behavior we barely understand. Reserved becomes rude. Private becomes secretive. Independent becomes lonely. And once those labels stick, every new observation filters through them. If she declined an invitation, it wasn't because she was busy. It was because she didn't want to mix. If she stayed inside during a neighborhood dispute, it wasn't because she didn't want drama. It was because she didn't care about the community. If she handled her own repairs without asking for help, it wasn't capability. It was standoffish. Assumptions don't just describe someone. They define how others treat them. Smiles become tighter. Invitations become fewer. Conversations happen just out of earshot. There's a subtle shift, almost invisible, but deeply felt. A kind of collective agreement forms without ever being spoken. She's different. And in a place where sameness feels safe, different feels threatening. What no one stopped to consider was how much of their certainty was built on absence. They didn't know her story. They didn't know her work schedule. They didn't know who she called at night or who called her. They didn't know what she had walked away from before arriving here. But they didn't need facts to feel confident. That's the power of assumptions in a close-knit community. They don't require proof. They only require repetition. One neighbor says something casually. Another nods. A third adds a detail. Soon it becomes shared knowledge. And shared knowledge feels solid, even when it's made of air. It creates distance without confrontation. It isolates without open hostility. It builds a narrative so strong that even the person at the center of it can feel its weight, even if she never hears the words directly. She could sense it in the way conversations paused when she approached, in the way people looked at her house just a second longer than necessary, in the way kindness sometimes felt rehearsed. They believed they understood her because they observed her. But observation without curiosity is just surveillance. And surveillance always tells a simpler story than the truth. Silence makes people uneasy. We say we respect it. We claim we admire calm, self-contained individuals. But when someone consistently chooses not to explain themselves, not to overshare, not to react, something shifts in how they're perceived. In a neighborhood where volume equals presence, quiet can look like absence. And absence gets interpreted as weakness. She wasn't loud at meetings. When the HOA gathered to debate fence heights or parking rules, she listened more than she spoke. If she did speak, it was brief, clear, to the point. No extra emotion, no dramatic gestures. She didn't fight to be heard, and she didn't rush to fill empty space. That restraint made some people uncomfortable. There's a belief that strength announces itself, that confident people dominate rooms, that capable people make sure everyone knows they're capable. So when someone doesn't perform strength in obvious ways, it's easy to assume they don't have it. She didn't argue when a neighbor complained about her tree branches leaning slightly over the property line. She simply said she'd handle it. The next day, the branches were trimmed. No discussion, no back and forth, no defensive explanation. To some, that looked like submission. She didn't even stand up for herself. She just folded. But what they didn't notice was how steady she remained. No raised voice, no bitterness, just action. Silence often gets mistaken for surrender because it doesn't create a scene. And in a culture that equates noise with power, quiet responses feel small. When kids cut across her lawn, she didn't storm out. She didn't post a rant in the neighborhood group. She installed a simple, discreet border along the walkway. Clean, practical, clear. The message was delivered without confrontation. Again, people filled in the blanks. She won't say anything. She's too timid to speak up. They confused her refusal to engage in drama with an inability to defend herself. There's something about a person who doesn't react that unsettles others. Reactions are readable. Anger, excitement, irritation, fear. They give people something to respond to. Silence doesn't. Silence leaves space. And space makes people project. If she didn't respond to gossip, they assumed she didn't hear it. If she didn't correct a rumor, they assumed it was true. If she didn't confront someone who talked over her, they assumed she couldn't. But strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's controlled. Sometimes it's strategic. She chose her words carefully. She chose her battles even more carefully. Not every comment deserved oxygen. Not every slight required retaliation. That kind of discipline doesn't look dramatic. It looks passive to people who thrive on visible conflict. There's also the discomfort of not being able to read someone. When a person doesn't reveal much, others start testing boundaries. Small comments, small provocations, a joke that pushes a little too far, a tone that suggests dismissal. They were watching for a crack, a reaction, a sign that beneath the calm exterior was something fragile. When she didn't give it to them, the narrative shifted again. She's just socially awkward. She doesn't know how to deal with people. It's easier to label someone incapable than to admit you don't understand them. Silence demands patience. It requires listening. It asks people to slow down and observe more carefully. But most communities move fast. They want quick reads, easy categories. Friendly, difficult, outgoing, reserved, safe, suspicious. She didn't fit neatly into any of them. At neighborhood events, she would show up occasionally. She'd stand slightly off to the side, drink in hand, listening. She'd respond politely if spoken to. She'd leave without fanfare. No dramatic goodbye. No lingering gossip session. That departure would spark conversation. She never stays long. She doesn't seem comfortable. She's probably overwhelmed. No one considered that she might simply prefer depth over chatter, that she might conserve her energy instead of scattering it. There's a quiet kind of confidence in not needing to dominate space, in not feeling pressured to prove your presence, in allowing others to underestimate you because you know you don't owe them a performance. But underestimation has consequences. When people believe you are weak, they behave differently. They speak more freely around you. They test limits. They assume you won't push back. And in doing so, they reveal more about themselves than they realize. She noticed. She noticed who spoke kindly when others weren't listening. She noticed who rolled their eyes. She noticed who treated her silence like an invitation to control the narrative. Her quiet wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. Silence can be a shield. It can also be a mirror. The more they mistook her composure for fragility, the more comfortable they became underestimating her. And underestimation can be powerful, especially when the person being underestimated understands exactly what's happening and chooses not to correct it right away from the outside. Her life looked small. No loud gatherings. No constant visitors. No dramatic displays of success or struggle. Just a tidy house, a predictable routine, and a woman who handled her business without asking for help. In a neighborhood that measured strength by visibility, her life didn't look impressive. It looked minimal. But minimal doesn't mean empty. Every morning, before most of the street was awake, her kitchen light was already on. Coffee brewed at the same time each day. Laptop open. Phone face down. She wasn't scrolling. She was working, quietly building something that didn't require an audience. No one knew she managed a team across 3 time zones. No one knew her calm voice on conference calls carried authority that made executives pause. They didn't hear the way she gave direction, steady and precise. They didn't see the decisions she made before 9 a.m., the kind that shaped projects worth more than all the houses on the block combined. They saw a woman watering her plants. Strength often hides in routine, in discipline, in the ability to show up for yourself even when no one is clapping. She didn't need the neighborhood to validate her competence. She had already tested herself in rooms far less forgiving. Years ago, she had learned what chaos looked like. A different city, a different address, a different life that demanded she grow sharper, faster, more resilient than she ever expected. She learned how to read people quickly, how to document everything, how to protect herself without making a scene. That history didn't show in the way she walked her dog. What looked like simplicity was actually intention. The clean yard wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. The lack of decorations wasn't indifference. It was focus. The quiet evenings weren't loneliness. They were peace she had earned. There's a kind of strength that comes from rebuilding, from packing your life into boxes and starting over without announcing why, from choosing stability over spectacle. She had done that. Not once. More than once. The neighbors saw her carrying her own groceries and thought she had no one. They didn't know she preferred it that way. That independence wasn't forced on her. It was chosen. She liked knowing she could handle what needed handling. She liked not owing anyone small favors that grow into quiet obligations. She had people, just not the kind who parked in front of her house. Phone calls that lasted hours. A sister who checked in every Sunday night. A college friend who would get on a plane without hesitation if she asked. A mentor who still sent her articles and advice. Support doesn't always leave footprints on your driveway. And even when she was physically alone, she wasn't unsupported. She had systems, savings, legal documents in order, cameras installed discreetly, contacts saved under simple names, plans for situations most people never imagine. Strength isn't only emotional. It's logistical. When a storm rolled through one summer and knocked out power across the block, she was the only one with backup batteries ready. The only one who had already filled containers with water. She lent out flashlights without making it a big deal, listened while others complained, returned to her house, and continued working by lamplight. They saw preparedness. They didn't see the mindset behind it. She paid attention to contracts, to neighborhood patterns, to the way certain people tested boundaries. She noticed which houses had cameras and which didn't. She knew the HOA bylaws better than most of the board members. Quietly informed, quietly ready. Her strength didn't need witnesses. It showed up in smaller ways too. In how she held eye contact without flinching. In how she never over-explained herself. In how she declined invitations without guilt. In how she apologized only when necessary and meant it when she did. There was nothing fragile about her calm. Some evenings, she sat on her porch alone. Not scrolling. Not hiding. Just present. Watching the sky shift from orange to blue. Listening to the hum of distant traffic. That stillness wasn't emptiness. It was restoration. People assume strength must look busy, loud, surrounded. But sometimes it looks like someone who has nothing to prove. She didn't broadcast her accomplishments. She didn't correct every false assumption. Letting people think she was ordinary gave her space. Letting them underestimate her gave her room to move without scrutiny. The hidden strength behind a quiet life is that it's self-defined. It isn't built for display. It doesn't depend on approval. It doesn't crumble when ignored. It grows in private, in habits no one sees, in boundaries no one hears being set, in choices made long before anyone else notices their impact. And the more the neighborhood mistook her calm for emptiness, the more comfortable they became believing there was nothing behind it to worry about at first. It felt like friendliness. Casual waves. Small questions. Settling in okay. Let us know if you need anything. The kind of surface-level warmth neighborhoods pride themselves on. But friendliness can shift. In a place governed by rules and routine, attention is currency. Who mows when? Who parks where? Who brings trash cans in on time? The HOA existed to maintain order, at least on paper. In practice, it also maintained observation. Windows became vantage points. Porches became lookout posts. The neighborhood group chat became a live feed of minor offenses. A car parked slightly over the curb. A package left out too long. A visitor arriving after dark. When she moved in, she became part of that landscape. At first, the comments were ordinary. New neighbor at number 14. Has anyone met her? But as weeks passed and she didn't fold herself neatly into the expected social pattern, the tone changed. She keeps to herself. Anyone else notice she's up late? Is that the same car that was there last night? The shift from curiosity to surveillance is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind concern. Just making sure everything's okay. We have to look out for each other. Looking out can quickly turn into looking in. One evening, a board member knocked on her door to remind her about a minor landscaping guideline. The grass was within regulation. The mailbox was compliant. The reminder was unnecessary, but delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. We like to keep standards high around here. She thanked him, closed the door, checked the bylaws later that night, memorized the section numbers. After that, inspections felt more frequent. Not official ones. Informal walks that slowed near her property. Conversations that hushed as she stepped outside. A neighbor across the street adjusting their blinds a little too often. They weren't just watching for violations. They were watching her. It's easy to justify surveillance when someone feels different. She didn't attend every gathering. She didn't share details about her job. She didn't volunteer personal information. The less they knew, the more they speculated. The more they speculated, the more they watched. The HOA meetings grew more pointed. Discussions about community engagement, about participation, about making sure everyone aligns with our values. No one said her name, but eyes drifted in her direction. In close-knit spaces, conformity feels like safety. A person who resists easy categorization unsettles that safety. If she wasn't predictable, she needed to be monitored. One afternoon, she noticed a car idling slowly past her house. Not once, 3 times. The driver pretending to check a phone each pass. Later that night, a post appeared in the group chat about unusual activity in the area. No one mentioned that the only unusual activity had been them. Packages were noted. You've been getting a lot of deliveries. Guests were counted. That's the 2nd time this week. Lights left on became commentary. Up late again. The concern wasn't about safety. It was about control. When neighbors turn into watchers, they convince themselves it's responsibility. That vigilance protects property values. That scrutiny preserves harmony. But harmony built on suspicion is brittle. She felt the shift fully the day a complaint was filed about her security cameras. They were within legal placement, aimed at her own property, installed professionally. Still, someone claimed they felt uncomfortable. The irony didn't escape her. They watched from windows, from sidewalks, from screens. Yet her quiet precautions were framed as invasive, as if her decision to protect herself disrupted their unspoken right to observe without being observed. The board requested a review. She attended the meeting with printed documents. City ordinances highlighted. HOA bylaws tabbed. Calm voice. Steady eye contact. She spoke only when necessary. Some neighbors seemed surprised she knew the rules so well. Watching had made them confident. They assumed she wouldn't push back, that she would apologize, that she would adjust to ease their discomfort. Instead, she cited policy numbers from memory. The room shifted, but the watching didn't stop. It intensified. Now it carried a layer of defensiveness. If she was informed, if she was prepared, then she wasn't as passive as they had decided. The narrative began to evolve. She wasn't just quiet. She was strategic, maybe secretive, maybe calculating. The more they watched, the more they projected intention onto ordinary behavior. A late-night phone call became suspicious. A contractor visit became a theory. A locked gate became exclusion. Surveillance feeds on imagination. They forgot something simple. Observation works both ways. Every slowed car, every lingering stare, every unnecessary reminder. She cataloged them without making it obvious. Dates, times, patterns. When neighbors turn into watchers, they assume the subject remains unaware. That silence equals blindness. That calm equals compliance. They rarely consider that the person they are studying might also be studying them. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic explosion, no shouting match in the street. The moment everything changed came quietly, the way most turning points do. It started with a notice. A formal letter from the HOA, placed carefully in her mailbox. The language was polite but firm. Allegations of multiple minor violations. Landscaping inconsistencies. Excessive security measures. Uncooperative attitude regarding community engagement. A scheduled hearing date circled at the bottom. The list was detailed. Too detailed. Dates she recognized. Times she remembered being watched. Comments that sounded less like official observations and more like collected gossip, polished into administrative language. They had been building a file. For weeks, maybe months, small notes had been taken. Screenshots saved from the neighborhood group chat. Photos snapped from across the street. Conversations quietly summarized and forwarded. The assumption that she was alone had made it easier. No one expected pushback. No one expected preparation. The hearing was set for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. She arrived on time. Simple outfit. Folder in hand. Calm expression. The room was fuller than usual. Curiosity draws a crowd. Board members sat behind a long table, papers stacked in front of them. A few neighbors lined the walls, pretending not to stare. The tone was formal, almost rehearsed. The president began by outlining the concerns. A pattern of noncompliance. Behavior that created discomfort. Failure to fully integrate into community culture. She listened without interruption. When it was her turn to respond, she didn't defend herself emotionally. She didn't argue about intentions. She opened her folder. Inside were printed copies of every bylaw cited in the notice, highlighted and annotated. City ordinances regarding residential security systems. Property line surveys. Time-stamped photographs of her landscaping on the exact dates listed in their complaints. Then she placed something else on the table. A typed timeline. Dates and times of repeated slow vehicle passes by specific addresses. Screenshots of group chat messages speculating about her schedule. Audio recordings of a board member discussing her odd behavior within earshot of her porch. Copies of emails sent between board members that had been forwarded to her anonymously. The room shifted. She spoke evenly. Explained that while she had respected every written rule, she had also documented the pattern of targeted observation and informal harassment. She mentioned consulting an attorney regarding privacy violations and selective enforcement. She referenced state statutes about HOA overreach. There were no raised voices, just facts. The confidence that had filled the room at the start began to thin. The assumption that she would stumble under scrutiny dissolved. They had expected apology, maybe mild resistance, not evidence. One board member attempted to dismiss her documentation as misunderstandings. She calmly asked if the vehicle registered to that board member's address had or had not passed her home 3 times on the afternoon of June 12th. She read the license plate number from her notes. Silence. Another neighbor shifted uncomfortably when she quoted their own message from the group chat, the one suggesting she must be hiding something. She didn't accuse. She simply read it aloud. The dynamic changed in real time. The narrative that painted her as isolated now felt fragile. Because isolation had been the foundation of their confidence. They believed she had no one advising her, no one guiding her, no one reminding her of her rights. She clarified that she had legal counsel reviewing the situation. that any further selective enforcement or harassment would be formally addressed, that she preferred resolution within the community but was prepared for escalation if necessary. Prepared. That word landed heavier than any accusation. For the first time, they saw what had been behind the quiet. Not loneliness, not weakness, calculation, organization, restraint. The hearing ended without a vote. The board requested time to review additional information. Neighbors left in smaller clusters than they had arrived. Conversations hushed for different reasons now. The next morning, something subtle had changed. No slow car passes. No lingering stares from across the street. The group chat was unusually quiet. The tone, when it returned days later, was cautious, polite. A revised letter arrived by certified mail. Several violations withdrawn. Language softened. An invitation to move forward collaboratively. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. What they thought would be an easy correction had become exposure. Their assumption that she was unprotected had made them careless. They mistook her calm for vulnerability, her privacy for isolation, her silence for ignorance. The moment everything changed wasn't loud. It was the instant they realized the story they had built about her no longer held up under light. After the hearing, the neighborhood felt different. Not warmer, not friendlier, just aware. The glances were shorter now. Conversations no longer stopped abruptly when she stepped outside. The group chat shifted back to safe topics like lawn care tips and lost packages. The intensity that once surrounded her house dissolved into something more careful. They had learned something, even if no one said it out loud. For months, they had operated under a shared belief. She was alone. No partner. No visible family nearby. No steady stream of visitors. No loud support system announcing itself. In their minds, that translated into vulnerability. Alone meant unguarded. Alone meant uninformed. Alone meant easy. They never questioned that assumption because it fit the image they had created. Quiet woman. Minimal interaction. No visible alliances. What they failed to understand was that visible and actual are not the same. She had never needed an audience to validate her connections. The people who mattered to her didn't need to park in front of her house to prove their presence. Support doesn't always come with noise. The night after the hearing, she had a video call scheduled. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just a standing appointment with a small circle of people who knew her history, her habits, her strength. They listened as she summarized what had happened. They didn't react with shock. They weren't surprised she had been prepared. They knew her. One of them had helped her review the HOA bylaws weeks earlier. Another had recommended the attorney whose name she mentioned at the meeting. A third had reminded her to document everything the moment the pattern of surveillance began. She wasn't improvising. She was backed. Even beyond the people in her contacts, she wasn't isolated. She had professional networks, mentors, colleagues who respected her, a supervisor who trusted her judgment. Layers of connection that existed outside the narrow view of the neighborhood. They saw one street. She moved in multiple worlds. The truth is, she had chosen this house precisely because it allowed her independence. A manageable space. A location that made sense for her work. A neighborhood that seemed orderly on the surface. She hadn't moved in searching for community approval. She moved in seeking stability. Alone was not her condition. It was her preference. There's a difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is chosen. It's deliberate. It's the ability to enjoy your own company without feeling diminished. Isolation is forced. It's imposed by exclusion or lack of support. They confused the two. When they watched her carry groceries by herself, they saw absence. When she declined invitations, they saw distance. When she handled problems quietly, they saw fragility. What they didn't see were the systems in place. The emergency contacts listed in her phone. The savings account that meant she never had to depend on a neighbor's favor. The documentation stored securely. The professional advice a text message away. They didn't see that she was never navigating alone. Even in moments when she sat on her porch by herself, she wasn't small. She was centered. The stillness they interpreted as emptiness was simply peace without performance. After the board revised their letter, a few neighbors attempted cautious friendliness. A longer wave. A polite apology wrapped in vague language about misunderstandings. She responded with the same steady courtesy she had always offered. No bitterness. No gloating. Strength doesn't need to humiliate. It only needs to stand. Over time, something else shifted too. A quiet respect. Not affection. Not closeness. But recognition. The recognition that she was not an easy narrative. Not a character they could define from a distance. They began to think twice before speculating. Before screenshotting. Before driving slowly past her house. Because now they understood something fundamental. She was not unsupported. She had allies, even if they were invisible. She had knowledge, even if she rarely displayed it. She had preparation, even when she appeared relaxed. She had herself. And that, more than anything, unsettled them in the beginning. A woman comfortable in her own company. A person who didn't need constant validation. Someone who moved deliberately instead of reactively. They thought she was alone because they equated presence with noise. They never considered that the strongest foundations are often the ones you can't see.